Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fifth installment of the Zero Experiment. I am super excited to see you all here, and I'm also really excited to introduce our wonderful artist for the evening, Mike Dreeland. We will be talking a little bit more about Mike's accomplishments a little later. He has an amazing portfolio, an amazing resume, and I'm super excited to have him here. We'll have Louise from the Walkabout Foundation say a few words. But before we get into all of that, I want to open it up to DJ CJ, who will be our musical performer for the evening.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm glad to be here, proud to be here. Thanks, Mike, for inviting me. Just here for the arts, support my great friend Mike D, the greatest pop artist in NYC. And, let's just have a little fun.
Jackie's a TV addict. There's no mean to bring static. When the Klingons in the fucking house, grab your backstreet friend, they get loud. Pulling off inches, grabbing with the inches, and no fucking retire. That's how we bring you the most fire. Now I slam it when I'm trying to make sure it's song, cause I won't let nobody put myself in that self-esteem. I said, I like to stand in the crowd and watch the people wonder, damn, but think about it, then you understand. I'm just an addict, addicted to music, maybe it's a habit. I got it music, even if it's jazz or quiet storm, I don't beat up on it, and then I hit my heart, right around ingredient, every shit you see me in, deep concentration, cause I'm no comedian. Body moving, we be body moving, body moving, body moving, body moving, we be body moving, body moving, a body moving, body moving, we be body moving, body moving, a body moving, body moving, body moving, body moving, body moving, body moving, we be body moving, body moving, body moving, body moving, we be body moving, body moving, a body moving, body moving, we be body moving. Thinking of a master plan. This ain't nothing but sweat inside my hands. So I to my pocket, all my money spent. So I should leave, but I'm still coming up with plans. So I can start my mission, leave my residence. Thinking how I'm gonna get to that presidents. I need money. I used to be a stick-up kid, so I think of all the previous things I did.
Thanks, guys. Good luck, Mike.
Great. Excellent.
That was one way to pump up the energy. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about you? Where can they find you on Facebook, Instagram?
I got a SoundCloud, DJ CJ 2020, easy to find. I got a bunch of tracks I threw up there. I'll have a version of this up there as well. And, just kind of getting started. So I appreciate the opportunity for Mike D. I give it up to you guys. Have a great show tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to have you. So on that high energy note, I'm going to do a little introduction onto everyone who's here. That was DJ CJ. We are also here to support the Walkabout Foundation. We have Louise on the line. They're doing some absolutely incredible stuff. He's going to tell you his story after this. And Mike Dreeland, or M. Dreeland, is our artist for the evening. I'm very excited to have him. Mike is a contemporary pop artist living here in New York City. He has sold and shown work all around the world and has done collaborations and installations from everything from hotels to movie premieres. He was commissioned by the movie Zoolander 2 Paramount Pictures to do a mural on Art Basel this year, which is very, very exciting. He has received acclaim around the world. He has been mentioned in the New York Times, Arts Observer, White Wall Magazine, Paper Magazine, Manhattan Magazine, and GQ. This is an amazing resume. So Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm gonna put it over to you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. you know, we want to hear everything.
Me?
Now we can.
Okay, I think I was just unmuted for a second.
Actually, before I pass it over to you, I actually want to hear from Louise before anything.
Okay.
So Louise, can you
Yeah,
tell us about the work
okay.
about? We want to
Okay,
know if people buy, it's going to help them do some great work.
Okay, my pleasure. My name is Luis Gonzalez Bunster. I am a paraplegic who was injured in 1994 due to a car accident. My sister and I, a little over 10 years ago, started the Walkabout Foundation, which is a charitable international foundation headquarters in London. Walkabout Foundation's mission is to restore dignity, freedom, and independence for people with mobility disabilities by providing wheelchairs and rehabilitation in the developing world, while funding research to find a cure for paralysis. Our three-pronged approach means that we tackle the issues from all angles, ensuring that we create a sustainable model that provides short, medium, and long-term solutions. First, the wheelchairs. We distribute wheelchairs that are locally repairable, custom-fitted wheelchairs to people in developing countries. We believe that proper wheelchair provisioning and training are instrumental in changing the lives of each recipient, their families, and communities. Number two, rehabilitation. We provide physical and occupational therapy and training to children and adults with mobility disabilities. Third, research. We fund medical labs around the world in the groundbreaking research to find the cure for paralysis. To date, we have distributed over 16,000 wheelchairs in 24 developing countries, and set 2 rehabilitation centers in India and Kenya, impacting the lives of an estimated 43,000 people. Walkabout goes towards our charitable programs. I don't know. Is that enough? Does that sum it up?
That's
what we do.
All right. Well, thank you for explaining that.
Okay. Thank you.
We're very honored to meet you guys.
Thank you very much.
So any sales from tonight will go to the Walkabout Foundation and helping Louise's cause and helping people with a disability around the world. So,
exactly.
Well, I'm going to pass it over to Mike now. So Mike, let's unmute you there.
All right. Marina, thank you very much, and the Zero Experiment for having me tonight. Really excited to be a part of it. Louise, thank you very much for being here tonight on behalf of the Walkabout Foundation. It's a really great organization, and happy to donate. Yeah, I guess we'll just dive right in. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a creative director, designer, and a contemporary pop artist. Most of my days consist of working in the creative advertising field. Like Brandon said, I'm a contemporary pop artist. As well. So as Marina mentioned, I've had shows all over the world and showed work. I've been living and working in New York City in Manhattan for almost about 20 years now. It's been a pretty interesting ride. As far as my work pretty much consists of like 3 kind of key components. One of them in particular is color, another is texture, and another is repetition. When it pertains to color is something that's always really been fascinated by me, and the way the colors, mix and match and reflect off one each other. So that's something that's really a key element to a lot of my work. Secondarily is texture. Texture is something that I've really been working on and constantly exploring through a lot of my work. So you'll see a little bit earlier tonight of some of the earlier works and kind of what some of the newer stuff that I've been working on as of late. As far as regarding texture goes, there's obviously a lot of different ways that one can build texture. Mostly all of the work that I do is in acrylic paint. So for me, one of the biggest reasons that I use an acrylic paint is I really like those. I really like the color palette of acrylic paints, as well as also the drying time. Because for me, what I do is it consists of a lot of layers, so it's really hard for me to go forward until the initial layer is dry and completed in order for me to kind of go forward. As far as, like I said before, about how texture is a key component of a lot of my work. I typically use what's kind of referred to as a relief technique, which is kind of commonly used in sculpture. However, I use it when I'm producing paintings. One of the things I often use, even more often than painting brushes, is sculptural tools. A lot of these sculptural tools I either make, design, or just kind of use from random objects, and I can definitely show you guys a little bit more of that, later on. So for me, what I do is that I typically, due to the fact that a lot of my work is very thick paint, what I do is I paint flat, which what it means is that I don't put a canvas up on an easel. I put a canvas down on a table, and that allows me to really dive right in to the different consistencies of paint, and able to, like I said, use that relief technique in order to take away. So a lot of times, we'll start off with either a thin layer of color, and then a contrasting color on top of it, and then I'm able to go in with either sculpting tools or brushes, or even the back of a brush, and really scrape that painting off in order to paint off on top to see the layer underneath. And you'll see that kind of consistent throughout a lot of the work that I do. And then, like I said, thirdly, one of the things I mentioned is repetition, and that's something that I think that kind of coins me as someone as a pop artist. Is Warhol probably did it best with a lot of his work in a repetitious format. So for me, what I do is that I create a lot of custom stencils on my own. So what that means is that I just kind of start off on the computer, design, kind of a step and repeat pattern. Some of them are very simplistic, meaning that they're just, common shapes, circles, squares. Other ones kind of have a little bit more of a complex design. Early in my career, I used to do these with literally just like paper, and literally just to print out the designs like on the computer, adhese them to a thicker piece of paper, and then actually cut them out by hand, and then use these custom stencils to then in turn create a lot of layers and depth in my work. Over time, I kind of explored different ways to kind of to make stencils, and then, like I said, over time what I was doing is I was having a lot of them like laser cut, and laser cut at different thicknesses of like plexiglass. And basically what that would do is that would basically hold the shape of the paint within each stencil that I would create. So sometimes the stencils that I would create would be very, very thin, and it would hold the paint to a certain depth. And other times I've been exploring, especially as of late, with these custom stencils that I would create that were a little bit on the thicker side of plexiglass, up to maybe as an eighth as much as a quarter inch. So then that creates a lot of additional depth. And then from there, like I said, that I go with these kind of sculpting tools and create designs in the pattern. So so just kind of like an overall gist about my work. It basically consists of a lot of color, a lot of texture, and a lot of repetition.
Mm-hmm. Your work is so colorful too. It's amazing. Your portfolio is so diverse. You did some work for the Zoolander 2 premiere. You did some stuff down in Art Basel. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. That was probably one of the best projects I've ever had the opportunity to work on. A few years ago, I got a call from Paramount Pictures from a woman who's been to one of my pop-up art shows in the city. They were doing a big premiere for Zoolander, and they wanted to have a really strong presence during Art Basel. So we came up with a couple designs based off of some imagery that they sent me from the movie. I was able to come up with some designs. I sent them over. Ben Stiller actually had to approve the creative, so that was actually pretty cool. He actually has the ability, or has the ability to approve all of the work with his face on it. So that was kind of nice. However, I didn't necessarily get a chance to meet him, but just the fact that he was able to see my work was pretty exciting. So they approved the design. It was 8 foot by 40 foot. They flew me and a team of artists that I selected that were a great group of people. And they flew us all down there from New York, and we did the installation, which you can see on my website on mdreeland.com. There's a final picture of that. There's also a video in the video section that shows you you know, the metamorphosis of how the project went. But it was a great project. It was, you know, it was like the #1 feed during Art Basel on Snapchat. It got a lot of press.
You guys went viral for that.
Yeah,
I
Zoolander.
remember the mural that you created at Art Basel. It was trending for a while, and people were
it was trending for a while, which was a big shock. You know, they asked us to basically do a little bit during the course of during Art Basel, so we were able to do like a little bit of it a day, so that people would kind of continuously be able to come back and see the evolution of the project. But then again, like I said, it was probably one of the biggest pieces I've ever done. We did it on the side of a shipping container, which their production team just literally found and dropped in the middle of Wynwood, and we just kind of took it from there. So it was a really, really great project. Like I said, Derek Zoolander himself posted it up on his Facebook channel, and it had something like over 25,000 likes in like a day. So it was really, really amazing. It was a really, really amazing project, and it was a real pleasure to work with the team as well.
I was gonna, sorry to cut you off there. I was gonna ask you, can you give us your best blue steel?
maybe I'll do that at the end. Maybe I'll close out with it at the end. But yeah, it was a really, really awesome project. It was really great working with Paramount Pictures. Yeah, it was really great.
Awesome. Yeah, that's such a fun project. I do remember seeing that, you know, go viral and go everywhere. So where are you at currently now? Is this your current studio? Is that
so where I'm currently right now, I live and work in Manhattan. Currently in my studio right now in the second bedroom of my apartment, which is now my current art studio space. I live in the Upper East Side. I lived up here for the past 5 years, my wife and my dog. And yeah, so it's nice to have like a studio in-house. It's a big improvement from my probably 15 years in New York City prior to working out of a milk crate jammed in out of my studio. So so it's nice to actually have some space and some room to work around. So yeah, so right now I'm currently in my studio. It's about as clean as I've seen it in quite some time for you guys. So you can kind of organized. Yeah, so this is where I'm at right now.
I do want to touch on one more point before we do the studio tour. You had a very unique approach to the art world when you first started. A lot of artists, they believe that they can't really get too far unless they have gallery representation, but you went the other route. You're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be in a gallery. So you started throwing parties and kind of like paving your own way to kind of create your own shows. It's such a unique approach. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, I think like a lot of young and aspiring artists kind of get your name out there is probably, and your work out there is probably really one of the hardest parts. And, you know, if we go, you know, as further back as, you know, 1999, when I first got to Manhattan with a lot of paintings under my arm and no representation or no gallery to show, I kind of took the liberty of myself and thinking that, you know, at the end of the day, like, what do I really need? And at the end of the day, I found what I really need is really just 4 walls and a roof. I had a, you know, pretty good following of people that have seen and liked my work in the past. So I knew that I was going to be able to draw somewhat of a decent crowd. So I took a different approach. I basically started looking into like raw spaces and clubs and, you know, restaurants that were new and that open, any place that really just had 4 walls that was willing to show, you know, my work. So, I, you know, I just felt that, you know, over time, you know, like you said, you know, working a full-time job as well as working full-time on this, it's, you know, it's quite a lot of work to produce these shows, but it was all, you know, obviously I created all the work, and then for me to actually, you know, promote the work, sell the work, you know, take photographs of it, get it up online. It was really, you know, quite like an undertaking. So what I did was that I leveraged a lot of my advertising connections and kind of learned the business on how to kind of pitch business and how to put decks together and pitch to different companies for different type of sponsorships. So I always felt like if you had an art show sponsored by, you know, a legitimate, you know, legacy brand, that would really help your brand out as well as a lot. So for me, that's kind of really where I got my start. And I was able to, you know, year after year, was able to produce enough work, kept on having these shows. The crowds and crowds over time got bigger and bigger. And, you know, deep down in my heart, I always felt that, you know, someday somebody important is really going to show up. And probably about 7 or 8 years into it, the New York Times and Manhattan Magazine showed up. And it was a big turning point for me. But they wrote a write an article about me and how I was doing things a little bit differently and kind of the avant-garde, out of the box artist, you know, showing in new, different, you know, kind of contemporary ways. And over time, that really generated a lot of, you know, representation, and galleries started reaching out to me. And the next thing, I had a gallery and an opportunity to show at Art Basel, at Spectrum, and at Red Dot, and a lot of these larger contemporary shows. So by having these shows, you just keep, you know, kind of believing in yourself and getting it out there, and knowing that someday someone's important is going to show up and really just change things. That's what's really was my, you know, my initial motivation. So still to this day, you know, I'm very happy to partner with, you know, with galleries and different types of companies to collaborate and work on different projects with. But I still always, usually on a yearly basis, still try to have one, you know, solo pop-up show, because it actually gives me the opportunity to go direct to the consumer and have that relationship between artist and buyer. So yeah, it's been really, really great. And like I said, I continue to have these pop-up shows on a yearly basis. So obviously now with COVID, this is this year's show, I think. So yes. We'll see how this kind of takes off. But yeah, that's a little bit of background on kind of how I got started.
Great. Do you want to do a studio tour and take everyone around, show them pieces?
Sure. Let me see. Let's flip this around here for a little bit. So I'll show you here some of the pieces that I've kind of been working on, and a little bit of kind of what I was talking about earlier. So this is one of my pieces here. It's called Dark Horse. You know, like the lamp a little bit kind of stuck behind it there, but you can see this. But this is kind of like one of the earlier pieces. This piece in particular is from about 2010 when I really started creating these custom design stencils specifically made out of like a thin plastic. So you can see here how I was able to kind of like hold the shape, and then you can see here how it kind of created a little bit of texture and stuff. So this was basically a piece that I did. I had this single stencil that was really only maybe like 3 feet by, well, I'm sorry, the stencil itself was maybe I don't know, maybe like a foot by foot and a half. So then I had to be able to kind of pick that stencil up and kind of create that and be able to move that around throughout the piece. So that was a little bit about this one. And then as I was saying before, when I was talking about texture and building up texture, this piece right here is a really good example of that. This is something that I did a few years back. And as I kind of zoom in here, you can see the heavy, you know, the heavy texture and stuff here that really makes this thing really pop from a three-dimensional point of view. This piece here is called Network, and what it is it's all acrylic and then some metallic paints intertwined within it. And then what this is right here is that this is like an oriental string cotton rag paper. And what I loved about this in particular is that it really shows, what I really love about this in particular is that it shows, you know, it really creates like a lot of depth. And one of the reasons why I really love working with these, with a thick cotton rag paper, and for those who don't know what rag paper is, it's basically a paper that's more made out of cotton and cotton as opposed to wood. So for me, what it does is it really absorbs a lot of the pigments, which is amazing. And then it really gives the paintings a lot of that depth and texture, which I really like and is always kind of looking for. So that's another one of the pieces here in my studio. Here's another couple pieces. This piece in particular right here is called Feeling Saucy. It's from a series that I do called the Stencil series. And basically what this piece is it's a piece, this piece is titled Feeling Saucy, and it's 40 of my favorite sauces. Kind of somewhat of a sauce fanatic. But the overall theme of a lot of these Stencil series pieces is that each piece consists of about 40 words. Each word gets stenciled on. And they're all basically like a theme basis. So I've had clients that have come to me. I had one client who bought an apartment up in Harlem who wanted all, you know, Harlem streets and landmarks up there. I had another client who was big into sailing and wanted to do all like nautical terms. So we did like, you know, 40 nautical terms and was able to stencil those on, you know, on a piece. And on average, these pieces are particular about 3 feet by 4 feet. So this is another one of the stencil series that I like, that I have currently in my studio, and comes in this kind of crazy, obnoxious, wild, vintage fluorescent frame that I found at like a thrift store, like in the city, and was able to restore it and use it for this piece in particular, which I really liked a lot because it kind of gives it that vintage like modern vintage kind of look and feel with the piece. So that was something that was really exciting. This piece right here is something that's new. It's kind of a combination of what I was explaining to before, of a combination of stencils and then also that relief technique. This piece particular is called Gaslight. It was inspired by a night out in New Orleans, really late at night, and just kind of the wild colors like shimmering across the street kind of gave this one like a lot of inspiration. And what this is here is, as I kind of zoom in, you can see a little bit here of a sort of a spray painted on stencil that I created, actually that was from a piece of sheet metal that was from like a radiator cover. So I was able to use that, and it kind of has like a sort of like a Tory Burch kind of pattern design logo to it, which I kind of really like. And then what I was able to do is take this teardrop shape and step and repeated it north and south, and I had this cut out in a plexiglass, which was able to create, allowing me to basically create about 25 to 30 of these teardrop shapes at once. So you're able to see how that kind of consistent, and basically what it is that each one of these stencils was then filled with paint and then scratched out and carved out. So that's what gives it this this thick kind of texture. And then what I've been doing lately, as of late, is really exploring with a lot of different like papers, like I mentioned before about that Oriental string paper. But I found that a lot of the rag paper and stuff that I've been working with is really great because it really soaks up a lot of the pigments and color. So I've been using a lot of that and as far as some of the newer stuff. And then you can see here is that kind of scratched on, scratched off relief technique here. So you can see how like it kind of started with a pink underlaying color and then went over it with an aqua and then started kind of scraping it off and creating a lot of different shapes within it, and then was able to sort of kind of like frost the tops of it in order to kind of create some highlights and lowlights within the piece. So that is a little bit of the method behind the madness on this piece. Also, some of the newer stuff that I've been working on is very similar. This one in particular is a new stencil that I created, and literally just within the spirit of trying to keep things as simple as possible, it's really just a circular step and repeat pattern. So this stencil in particular, I think it was like 5 circles down, 7 across. So it allowed me to create and paint about 35 of these circular shapes within one shot. So this piece in particular, you can see here how it has all the different depths from the circular, from the different patterns. And then here in the corner and in the side is a vintage wallpaper that I found, and then just started basically using that as like a first layer. And then was able to kind of stain it and kind of, basically started through that in order to kind of build texture from it. And then I found this herringbone kind of pattern here at literally like an arts and crafts store, and somewhat modified it a little bit, and then it's been exploring. You can see here, this is just like in the upper left-hand corner is some more of that cotton rag paper that when I was applied on, it kind of gave it like a very kind of earth tone kind of look and feel to it. So you can see here that, it was kind of a nice complementary piece to the different types of shapes and the vintage wallpapers that I had on there. So that's something that's a new as of the past couple, probably the past couple months. And this is another piece that I'm also almost done with as well. Untitled as of yet, but you can see here it's this sort of the sister painting to this one here, with still continuing to use the circles and the stencil pattern. You can see here, and then with like a little bit of the relief technique by scratching the painting on, scratching it off, and creating a little bit of depth, was able to kind of give this piece a nice kind of orange and purple color to it. So yeah, so that's some of the newer stuff. Let's see here. And then, as I mentioned before, living in New York City is the different, there's only so much room to work. This is pretty much my work studio here, which is a little bit of a mess, but I took a bunch of tables and just kind of put everything onto one table as I was kind of cleaning this up. Here's my work fridge. Of course, no studio would be complete without it. And then here, like I said, I do everything. It's all basically acrylic base. So, I use everything from expensive paints right down to 5 and dime, very, very cheap paints. And you get kind of a lot of different results with using a lot of different
different products. One of the things I mentioned before was about some of the tools and stuff that I've made and used. This is probably one of my favorite here. It's a bamboo stick. It gives me a lot of opportunity and control to just take different layers off in different thicknesses. This here's another one. Some of these tools are that I find that come with somewhat of like a thin, like a really thin, lightweight wood. So it gives me the ability to use sandpaper to kind of then, you know, either create points or rounded objects. And it gives me, like I said, these are just more kind of sculpting tools that I use, you know, to take away and use and, you know, and sort of maximize that relief technique. Here's another one. You can see that this one right here is pretty used and a very common tool that I use to, you know, create different designs and sketches through that. So, yeah, so like I said, kind of a combination of anything between, you know, paint, you know, from relief technique to different papers. You know, I have quite an extensive collection here of colored pencils. I use those a little bit from time to time. It's just kind of sketch stuff. And yeah, so that's a little bit of kind of my studio and kind of workbench here. This piece in particular here is a collection that I did called Motherly Advice. And it's 6 iconic motherly advice sayings with special packaging behind each letter. So this one in particular is called Because I Said So, and it has Smarty wrappers behind it. This is one of 6 collections that I did. I did another one that was titled Watch Your Mouth with soapboxes behind it. I have another one here that I did titled Look Both Ways. And this one here is made of all by zine packaging. I haven't, and like I said, this is one of 6. These are all on my website if you wanted to take a look at that at on mdreeland.com. Here's some images. That was a picture of the mural that we were just talking about that I did during an Art Basel for Zoolander. Here is just kind of a bunch of collages and just different things I've sort of acquired in my studio throughout the years. Here is a couple of prints that I've done in the past. Typically like to show some pieces at the shows that are more of a lower price point. Usually these are some that like a lot of like my clients just, you know, just like to either take away, or I've even donated a lot of these to different charities for, you know, for different organizations. These right here are just basically that silk screens, single silk screen print that I did with actually a New York City heating grate. So you can see some of these right here, that kind of like different styles here. And this is a collection of 1 of 20 that are all signed and numbered. So, so yeah, so these are something that's kind of interesting that I like to kind of do is like before I start to get into a lot of the bigger pieces, I'll do like a lot of test prints and sort of kind of like a series of kind of one-offs, just to kind of see how like the paper is, the paint is applying to the paper, how well is the stencil holding the, the paint, depending on if the paint's either thick or thin or, whatever the consistency of it may be and how it kind of reacts within the stencil. So that's also, that's also something that I do as far as in preparation of some of the larger pieces. This piece right here is something that's definitely new and has kind of an interesting story. This piece right here is called Milk Cloud. I came up with this idea called Milk Cloud, which is basically somewhat of a cartoon kind of stencil of a milk container in a cloud back in, I don't know, I guess say like 2010, 2011, cloud-based systems were becoming very, very popular. People were talking about the cloud, uploading things to the cloud. And it really kind of just, my mind kind of went off and was thinking about what exactly would be like in my cloud. And believe it or not, I'm a huge avid milk drinker. So I was like, oh, that's the one thing in my cloud that I could never go without. So I kind of created this kind of stencil called Milk Cloud. And I wasn't really sure what to do with it. At that point, I was really more focused on really, honing in on my craft regarding the thick paint and building textures and working with colors and how they all reacted to each other. So I wasn't necessarily really there, I think, creatively to kind of really pursue something with Milk Cloud. But over the past year, I have a sketch of it hung in my studio bathroom here, and I've had a couple people that have seen it and just made comments, and I felt like, maybe this is the time to kind of put something together. So I took this design, I printed it out on a 3-foot by 3-foot canvas, and then was basically from there able to take a lot of those thick, like I said before about this thick oriental kind of rag papers that really absorb a lot of pigments, and kind of start playing around with that on top of these. You know, like I said, still sitting within the you know, the range of layers and consistency and color, and really then started producing this. So this is like I said, again, it's got another one of the little vintage wall paper prints here. And then, like I said, I've been just kind of exploring sort of like overlays with this one in particular. So this is, what's that?
It's a great piece. It sort of reminds me of like Andy Warhol, how he had the pop pieces, and it's like very repetitive, you know?
Yeah, I agree. This one is definitely very repetitive. I mean, I originally designed this in color, but then I wound up having to print it out in black and white because I didn't want it to compete with the colors that I was going to apply regarding the paint. So that was something that, like I said, this is kind of an experimental canvas now, but I've gotten a lot of really good responses of it. So this is probably the first of many Milk Cloud pieces to come. So
yes, very relevant.
Thank you very much. So yeah, so then moving along to the studio, I was mentioning before, I have a studio bathroom here, which is nice and great to have a little you know, studio sink here and everything. You can kind of see that. This is another one of the pieces here, created from a New York City heating grate stencil, and you can see here the thick texture and the color palette that pops up. This one in particular is called Sunset Tile. And it was inspired by an evening that me and my wife were out and about and coming home quite late. And as the sun was coming up, you know, as we're walking, you know, down Fifth Avenue, I'm not sure if any of you from out of town or even locals know that a lot of the tile that surrounds Central Park is all in a hexagon pattern. So that was really the inspiration behind a lot of this. So what I did was I took to the canvas and created a very simple sort of hexagon pattern that was very much scratched on, scratched off with a very thin tool, which is very similar to almost like a shish kebab skewer. It had that basically the same type of like thickness. And what I was allowed to do was basically to kind of scratch that hexagon pattern on there. And then I used that as a background, and then in the foreground went heavy with the radiator steel stencil. So what that was able to do is that was able to kind of create a lot of depth over the existing pattern, and then from there was just able to kind of here that on some of the stencil work that I've done here, it raises a little bit on the thicker side, where then some of it here, it kind of fades off. And that kind of all depends on, you know, on basically, like I said, like the liquidity of the paint, the time, the temperature that it's out, whether I'm painting in the winter, I'm painting in the summer, whether it's hot in the studio or cold in the studio, it really plays a big factor on how the paints work and collaborate together. So
you certainly have a very interesting technique there. And I'm seeing a lot of people in the comments, they have questions. So perhaps it's time to open it up to a bit of a Q&A.
Sure. Yeah. More than happy to kind of walk and talk through any questions anyone might have. Let me get out here, give you a little bit out here out of the bathroom here. See the rest of the studio. Awesome. Yeah. Did you want to open it up to some people that had any questions?
Yeah, it's fascinating to kind of get into your mind and think like an artist and see through your eyes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I have a question from Jim Clark. So,
okay.
Hi.
Jim, are you there? Jim?
No, I'm there.
Okay, hi. You have a
Hello,
question?
Jim. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing us into your home and your studio bathroom, and it's great to see your work.
Thank you.
It's really great work, and you know, sometimes you see artwork that you know is good, and you know the artist is talented, but you wouldn't want to be around it all the time. And your art just is that kind of art that connects with you. You know, it gives you pleasure. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for that. So I've asked this question. I haven't participated in all of the Zero Experiment Thursday evening events, but at a couple of previous ones, I asked, when you hear feedback from fans and customers of your work, buyers and collectors of your work, and they give you compliments, and occasionally those compliments are exactly what you intended with the work? What are those kind of compliments where you're like, they get it, they get what I was trying to do?
Well, I mean, one of the probably most pleasing compliments that I've ever gotten is that you know, one of the things that's really the ground focus of all of my work, and the sort of the common thread, is that I always want the user to basically be able to see the piece as a whole, but then also to always be able to go back into the piece and look at specific sections of the piece and kind of get something different from it. I think a lot of the sort of unique designs and patterns are something that when you initially see as a whole, you'll be like, oh, okay, interesting, very cool. But then when you actually get a chance to go deep and go a little bit closer, you're able to see a lot of the more intricate like designs. So for me, probably one of the best compliments is when someone's like, oh, I saw this, or I saw that in there, or this reminds me of something else, and something that, so for me is that like, that's for me is probably the most rewarding compliment, because then people are really getting and understanding like the whole motivation and premise of my work, which is, you know, to basically take something and see it as a whole, but then also be able to get something out of it time after time after time. You know, when you go back into it and perhaps maybe see something that you haven't seen, you know, months prior. So
quick follow-up question to that. What is of the pieces, which is your favorite and why?
That's a really good question. You know, it's so funny because I had a professor in college that was asked a question in a lecture, and he said, you know, and it's so interesting. It's always a common question that I get. It's like, how does one price your work? And this professor said that he always prices his work on three things: time, materials, and mental anguish. And I always found that to be very, very interesting, because some pieces where I'm just like in the flow, cranking music all night, and I'll just stay up all night and just work on a piece because I'm just really like, you know, kind of really getting into it and enjoying it. And then there's other pieces that I've had where whatever the idea is in my mind, it's for some reason, it's just like a struggle to kind of get there. So for me, I think probably one of my favorite pieces that I've done with is actually this one right here, and I'll flip it around. It's right over my shoulder here. This right here is called the Candy Rhino, and you can see here this piece here. It's really only one of maybe like 3 sculptures that I've ever done before. And what it is, it's a rhinoceros head. This piece took me about 4 years to make it. I came up with this idea on vacation with my wife in Italy after too many bottles of wine, and staggered through the streets of Paris and was just thinking of what would be like the greatest thing that I've ever made before ever. I mean, this is going on about 5 years ago. And I came up with this concept of doing like a gigantic rhinoceros head, but in the same sort of similar texture and pattern that I've done a lot of my work here. So you can see about a lot of here how it has like a lot of string and it builds a lot of texture. And then the name of it, the Candy Rhino in particular, is because I did the horns in rock candy. And then I took the entire piece and siliconed it to an oak animal head placard. So this piece in particular was something really interesting and challenging for me because I've never worked in something that was 3-dimensional. As I mentioned, it took almost like 4 years to do. And that's because I worked on it for probably a couple years and then and got so in the zone on one side, I never had the opportunity to really kind of like flip it over and started working on the other side. And it actually took me almost like a year to actually rebuild the whole thing like continuously and seamless, like all across the whole thing. So this is a piece that I literally just finished up like last summer, and is probably one of my most unique and most proud pieces.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and it definitely reminds me of the pain and anguish of some of my past relationships. So you mission accomplished. So.
That's great.
Thank you for your question, Jim.
Thank you.
I have one question from Matthew Pierce. So Matthew, I'm going to unmute you. Would you like to ask Mike your question?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to get Mike's perspective on, you know, with the time we're living in now and you saying like you've gotten a lot of inspiration from like being out in Manhattan and seeing certain things. Are you finding it, you know, you got this extra time, I'm assuming, are you finding it more, is it easier to create during this time, or is it more challenging with kind of like being indoors all the time? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, like I said, you know, when somebody asks me, you know, what inspires me, I get that question a lot. And I would always refer back to like New York City and like the streets that we live on, whether it be, you know, advertising that I find inspiring, things that I find from a graffiti level and back alleys I find inspiring, pop culture inspires me, a lot of like different things. So now in the time that we live in, like New York City is dead. I mean, it's just like a cold, total ghost town. I'm not saying that people aren't still living and working and creating great things, but the outdoor environment is very stagnant right now. I mean, obviously, if you've seen pictures or been a local New Yorker and have walked around, you've seen people with masks and gloves on, and very few people walking around the streets in some of the busiest areas in Manhattan. So, you know, for me, I feel like the inspiration is a little on the lower side. However, being very inspired now to your earlier point that I do have the time. So, you know, ideas that I've had written down in my sketchbook forever. Like I said, you know, like I showed you earlier, some of the pieces that I was doing with, you know, Milk Cloud. I mean, I came up with Milk Cloud almost 9 years ago and have never really decided to do anything with it. I felt like this was the time. I created a real simple stencil out of plexiglass that was literally just circles, just like simple circular pattern, step and repeat. And I had that stencil made, geez, I guess maybe 3 or 4 months ago, but never really had the time to really kind of go into it. So as much as maybe the inspiration is low, I'm really now more inspired by going through like my old notebooks and notes and really now finally getting the opportunity to create the things that I never really had, you know, like a lot of time for. So
awesome. Love
yeah.
it.
So,
Thank you for your question.
yep.
So I have one more question from Zach. Sorry, let me unmute him. Zach, are you there? You're on the line?
Sorry, camera's not working.
It's okay. Yep.
So, you were talking about a lot about the texture in your pieces. What is it that inspired you to go down the route of texture rather than, you know, flat?
I mean, you know, I've seen a lot of textured work. I mean, you know, we've probably all seen like, you know, Van Gogh's pieces. He's kind of the master of, you know, thick technique. You know, there's a lot of other artists that work in you know, in a three-dimensional kind of space. So for me, that's just something that I always just found interesting. I felt like, you know, when you're looking for depth and, you know, and, you know, in your eye to specifically move, which is really the kind of the basis and the foundation of a lot of my work, you know, you need those like layers and that depth. So for me, constantly always like looking for new and innovative ways to create depth. One of the things I found like in the past is where I would go so heavy with these stencils and cover the entire piece and just kind of let the paint kind of like, you know, sort of control the narrative here with the depth and how that would kind of, you know, work within the piece. And then I found myself as of late really kind of pulling back as I was showing you some of the pieces before, where I started integrating a lot of solid color, you know, paper patterns and not painting over those. So for me, you know, the exploration of layers is something that I just kind of always have gravitated to. One of the interesting things that I had in my last show that I had in Jersey City was that it was the first show that I actually created signs that said, "Please touch the artwork." And it was a very interesting sort of like experiment because, you know, typically when you go into any gallery, you're not allowed to touch anything. But I found that when people were looking at my work, they were just like always getting like a little too close or always kind of like wanting to touch it, but know that it was always like kind of taboo to do something like that in a gallery. So what I did was I created these little unique placards that said, "Please touch all the artwork." This is obviously way before COVID. People, you could see people really like, and what I found was that when people are like looking at it and they're like, oh, seeing the sign that I'm actually allowed to touch the artwork, then people were able to sort of like rub their hands over like the canvas and feel the depth and the texture within it. And for me, I found that was something that was something interesting and new, but sort of newfound that I felt like it gave like an interactive level, like with the person and the piece itself, that they were able to kind of, like I said, rub their hands over and feel the kind of different textures and the different depths within the layers. So for me, it was just kind of always something from a layer perspective that I always really liked and gravitated. And you know, and it just always really liked the results. I mean, you know, like I said, I was mentioned before about doing a relief technique, and the relief technique really allows me to draw like little designs and little intricate, you know, shapes and objects within paint themselves. So so for me, I think that the evolution of my work has really always been any opportunity to create depth.
That definitely makes sense. I can say from experience, the only painting that ever frightened me was a textured recreation of the Dolly melting clock piece. And when I was a kid, it scared the crap out of me. It was hanging in my bedroom. But I can definitely see how texture brings out the emotion and the depth of the piece itself.
Nice. Cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
For your question, Zach.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for asking.
I have one more question for you by Kaminsky, Jay Kaminsky. So she has a question about a book that's being re-released. So I'll let her take the floor and you guys can talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Let me unmute.
Oh, wait, hold on, John. You're not. Are you muted? Oh, I can't hear him. We can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Technical difficulties. It seems I can't unmute him.
Let's see. It says that he's still muted here on the.
There you go.
There we go.
Hi.
Hi. How you doing?
Hey. I wanted you to just talk about the book that you published in 2014 and how that got started.
Sure.
Because I think that's an interesting angle from that incorporates you as an artist in the real world and how odd things come together.
Yeah. So in 2014, I wrote a book called Primed for Stardom, about an artist living in the Lower East Side in the early 2000s. It was loosely based on my life, where at the time I was living in a building that was down on the Lower East Side on Rivington and in Essex, and we were approached by a reality show company to do a reality show. And long story short, we wound up shooting a pilot, but never made to review. But during the course of when we actually first met to when we stopped the project, it was about 10 months. And I wrote a book about one's life experience as an artist and from an artistic perspective, but like movie and the reality show world really like embraces you when they soon come to find out that you're going to be like the next big star. So obviously you haven't seen me on TV, so obviously the project didn't work out, but the experience itself was really, really amazing. We wound up shooting a pilot with HBO, which was a big treat. And then like I said, it went from being like somewhat sort of unknown but completely known right off the bat, where the story of me going to like a local sandwich shop where the guy would be like, yeah, here's your sandwich, and get out of here, you bum, and suddenly be like, hey, here's some extra soup. So when the cameras show up, make sure you come into my shop, just that total like 360 of how people like kind of perceive you and react towards you when they feel you're on the verge of fame and fortune was a very, really interesting experience. So yeah, so like I'm going to be re-releasing the book on Kindle and on paperback within the next 2 weeks. So that's pretty exciting. So be sure to take a look out for that. It's called Primed for Stardom.
Awesome. Thank you for your question. Thanks for explaining the book. It's very exciting.
Yes, very exciting.
Does anyone else have any questions? If you do, you can type them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand virtually. No? Okay.
All right.
All right. It's almost 7 o'clock. So do you want to say anything else, Mike?
No, I mean, I just want to, thank everybody for commenting and checking everything out. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the questions that everybody had and, coming forward. Thanks again, obviously, for the Walkabout Foundation. It's a really great organization. Be sure to check that out and donate if you can. Like Marina said earlier, 20% of all sales and proceeds of tonight are going to go towards that foundation, which is great. And then, like I said, for more information, you can always just check out my website on mdreeland.com. It's got everything from bio to old work to videos to previous shows, anything and everything you probably might ever need. So yeah, and then like I said, Marina has actually sent out a price list, which I and some information about myself and some of the pieces that are available. So I'm sure that'll go back out after the show, or you can reach out to.
I've also posted the pricing list in the comments, so yeah, you guys can have a look. We'll be reaching out. After this, we will be doing a live auction format as well, and we've just signed. I guess I can tell you guys the news now. We've just signed a partnership with a blockchain technology company. So from here on out, you will be able to bid on real time using blockchain. And it's going to be fun. So anything you buy, it's going to give you extra security.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really great kind of like using technology in ways such as this to really kind of, meet and connect with your clients and, and art connoisseurs alike. So it's a really, really great format.
It absolutely is. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here. I'm so excited to see you all. Some old faces, I see some new faces. And thank you, Mike. And thank you, Louise, as well, from the Walkabout Foundation. Do you want to let me unmute you? Louise, are you there? Would you like to say some closing remarks?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, we're really proud to be sponsoring Mike here with the Walkabout Foundation. It's really a great charity. We've already raised over $1.6 million for research to find the cure for paralysis, and we continue to help people in developing countries who need access to wheelchairs. Get wheelchairs that are all-terrain wheelchairs and are replaceable with bicycle parts. So if anything should happen to the wheelchair, wherever they are in the world, they can easily repair it, which is important. And it's just something that my sister and I got really interested in doing after the Haiti earthquake. Sorry, back in what was it, 2008, I think, or something. And when we went to visit Haiti, and there was a huge need for these type of wheelchairs. So that was the impetus for us to start that, and we've been helping thousands of people around the world ever since. So yeah, very, very happy to be a part of this, and yeah, hopefully we can help change the world for more kids and adults to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it looks so nice and sunny where you are too.
It does. It's beautiful out here. It's a little cold, but yeah.
Well,
glad we could help in any way, and thank you guys too. Thank you too. It's going to help our foundation, and ultimately it's about helping people. So
nice. Well, happy to help.
Mm-hmm. And I actually see some people logged on from Australia as well. So we're reaching all corners of the globe right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wonderful.
Nice.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We're actually 2 minutes away from 7 o'clock when everyone starts cheering. So I don't know.
Right, that's true in New York.
Around. Mike said that he wanted to.
Yes.
There and everyone.
Yeah.
I can unmute everyone. We can cheer for New York together.
Nice. Yes. Right around. Yeah. Like you said, like if you're a local New Yorker, right around 7 o'clock is really when you can start to hear, the screams and the claps and the cheering and stuff for all of the healthcare workers and essential workers out there in New York. So it's really great to kind of hear that hear that noise and that support coming from the city. I do have a little bit of an outside terrace here. Outside my studio, so I was kind of hoping that come 7 o'clock we would be able to hear some of the noises and the chants here. Let me see if I can.
It's a beautiful moment.
Hear it kind of going.
I live in Manhattan. I hear it too. I hear cheering. Like it fills the whole streets. My neighbors go outside. They do pots and pans. It's such a great way to bring the community together.
Yep. Up. You can kind of hear a little bit of some like horns and stuff, and some people cheering and clapping. You can kind of hear it starting up a little bit. Oh, okay. There it goes.
Oh, I can hear it on my end too.
Nice.
It's
a sunny day in New York.
Hear along on the line if you like.
Wait. You know, wait.
Woo! I mean,
Woo!
it's yeah, I'm like
So
done.
for anyone
to
that
be
doesn't
honest.
know, the cheer.
Yeah, I got some shit. I got some shit to do if you don't mind. I'll check you. I'll check out on here for you later. Check you out on here later.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
Nice.
Hey.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, thank you,
Guys,
everyone.
thanks so much.
The
Lovely
foundation
to
is
have you.
the Walkabout Foundation. Just remember that.
I'm
.org.
gonna send out a reminder to everyone. So I'm gonna say goodbye and have a great evening.
Okay, great. Everyone have a great evening.
Bye.
Hope to see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.